So we've just navigated the complex landscape of how our brains and bodies are wired for division, for drawing lines in the sand. But history, as always, throws us curveballs. It constantly reminds us that even when things seem utterly hopeless, sparks of connection can ignite. We're going to look at some fascinating examples where, against all odds, people found common ground, challenging that default setting of us versus them. Now, let's kick things off with a story from the Peninsular War. Imagine this: a bridge, British soldiers on one side, French on the other. Each has a sentry. The British officer rounds the corner, expecting a tense standoff, but finds his own man carrying both armies' muskets. Why? His French counterpart had snuck off to buy some booze for them to share. And naturally, he was watching the other guy's weapon. It sounds absurd, right? But this wasn't an isolated incident. Fraternization between enemy soldiers is surprisingly common, especially when conditions blur the lines. Think about it: same race, same religion often helps. Enlisted men, not officers, are more likely to connect. It happens more when it's just two individuals facing each other day after day, like those bridge sentries. That moment of mutual restraint someone could have shot, but didn't, creates a unique dynamic. And what do they talk about? Not grand geopolitical theories. No, it's practical stuff: swapping food, cigarettes, a drink. Complaining about the mud, the lousy rations, the incompetent officers. It's human connection finding a foothold in the most unlikely of places. This wasn't just a one-off. Look at the Spanish Civil War: Republican and fascist troops regularly meeting up at night, sharing drinks, trading goods, swapping news, always keeping an eye out for any officers lurking nearby. Or the Crimean War: picture this: Russian soldiers quietly exchanging their precious vodka for French baguettes right across the line. Even in the American Civil War, Yankees and Rebs would fraternize, barter, trade papers, and get this: whole joint baptismal services the evening before a battle they knew would be a bloodbath. Can you imagine that? Shared faith, shared humanity, right before plunging back into slaughter. It's incredibly poignant, isn't it? These moments show that beneath the uniforms and the propaganda, there was often a shared experience of misery and a basic human desire to connect, even briefly, with the other side. But then came World War I, a truly staggering scale of destruction. 15 million lives lost. The war to end all wars turned out to be just another chapter in Europe's long history of devouring its own youth in meaningless conflicts. Sure, there were some positive outcomes, like the collapse of empires freeing up people in places like the Baltic states, the Balkans, Eastern Europe. But viewed from almost any other angle, it was a catastrophe, a pointless slaughter. And yet, amidst this quagmire, two extraordinary events happened, things that still give us pause and wonder. First up, the Christmas truce of 1914. Picture this: along hundreds of miles of trenches, officers start tentatively shouting "no shoot" in broken languages, meeting opposing officers in no man's land. It began simply enough: an agreement to stop firing during Christmas dinner and to retrieve the dead lying out there. But then, it snowballed. Soldiers started lending each other shovels to dig graves, then helping each other out. Joint burial services followed. This led to exchanges of food, drink, tobacco. Eventually, unarmed soldiers swarmed into no man's land, praying together, caroling, sharing meals, exchanging gifts. They took group photos, swapped buttons and helmets as souvenirs, made plans to meet after the war. And the most famous part? Impromptu soccer matches with balls made of rags or rolled up socks, scores rarely kept. It was a stunning, moving, heartbreaking moment of peace. So why did this incredible truce happen? Several factors aligned. First, the unique setup of trench warfare. You were stuck facing the same enemy day after day. This led to constant, often friendly, taunting across the lines, creating a weird sort of familiarity. There was also a shadow of the future: betray the truce and expect immediate, brutal retaliation. Shared culture helped too. Everyone was steeped in similar Judeo-Christian traditions and Western European culture. Many knew the other side's language, had visited their countries. They were seen as the same race, Fritz, rather than dehumanizing pseudo-species like gooks or dinks. Interestingly, British and German troops were often involved. The Brits, fighting on French soil, didn't have a deep-seated hatred for Germans. They often saw them as less threatening than the French, even suggesting they should fight together against France. On the German side, many were Saxons, feeling a kinship with Anglo-Saxons, again suggesting they should unite against the dominant Prussians. And crucially, there was top-down support. Officers negotiated, the Pope called for peace, and Christmas itself, with its connotations of goodwill, provided the perfect symbolic backdrop. But the Christmas truce was special. Something even more remarkable happened throughout the war, the live and let live phenomenon. Here, soldiers spontaneously evolved stable truces without needing holidays, religious symbols, or official sanction. How did this happen? Historian Tony Ashworth documented it starting passively. Troops ate around the same time and guns would go silent. Who wants to interrupt dinner to kill someone or be killed? Same thing happened in awful weather. Everyone's priority became survival, not shooting. Mutual restraint also emerged based on future consequences. Wagon trains delivering supplies were easy targets, but they were left alone to avoid reciprocal shelling. Even latrines were spared. These truces arose from soldiers choosing not to do something harmful. But truces were also established through overt action. How? By having your best sniper repeatedly shoot at the same spot on an abandoned wall near the enemy lines. Think about the message. Look how good our guy is. He could have aimed at you instead, but chose not to. What are you going to do about it? The other side would reciprocate with their best sniper. An agreement to shoot over each other's heads was established. The key here was ritualization. Shooting repeatedly at the same inconsequential target, day after day, renewed the commitment to peace. It was a nonverbal negotiation played out in the landscape. These live and let live truces weren't fragile. They could withstand perturbations. Soldiers would signal if they had to shoot for real. For a while, maybe officers were coming. The system survived violations too. If some hot-headed rookie lobbed a shell into the other's trenches, the most common convention was 2 shells back, often aimed at important targets like HQ. Ashworth tells a story: Germans fire a shell into British trenches. Soon a German shouts, "We're sorry about that. We hope no one was hurt. It's not our fault, it's that damned Prussian artillery." Back fly 2 British shells. Despite these incidents, the truces emerged repeatedly. Of course, the brass in the rear often tried to intervene, rotating troops, threatening court-martials, ordering savage raids designed to shatter any sense of shared interests. But the soldiers kept reinventing these truces, again and again. So Ashworth explored the psychology behind this. How did participants view the enemy? He saw a progression. First, once any mutual restraint emerged, the enemy was recognized as rational, having incentives to hold fire. This created a sense of responsibility, initially purely self-serving. Don't violate the deal, or they'll violate back. With time, this responsibility developed a moral tinge, tapping into our resistance to betraying someone who deals reliably. Insights followed. Hey, they don't want dinner disturbed any more than we do. They deal with incompetent officers too. A creeping sense of camaraderie developed. This produced something striking. Despite the propaganda spewing pseudo-speciation from home, trench soldiers showed minimal hostility towards the enemy compared to those further away. One frontline soldier wrote, "Out here one can respect a brave, skillful, and resourceful enemy. They have people they love at home. They too have to endure mud, rain, and steel. Us and them became fluid. If someone was shooting at you, sure they were them. But otherwise, them was more likely the rats, the lice, the moldy food, the cold, or any comfortable officer safely far away." Think about the propaganda posters from the time. The American one depicting a monstrous ape threatening civilization, demanding destruction. The French cartoon showing France as a spider ensnaring Europe. The goal was clear: dehumanize the enemy, make them monstrous, incite hatred. And it worked to an extent, especially from afar. But the reality in the trenches, as we've seen, was different. Shared suffering, mutual reliance, the sheer absurdity of it all, it fostered understanding, even respect. It shows how easily the lines between friend and foe can blur, depending on context and direct interaction. The official narrative of pure hatred often clashes violently with the lived experience of those on the ground. However, these fragile truces couldn't last. As the war progressed, the British High Command adopted a horrific strategy of war by attrition. Basically, wear the enemy down by sheer force of numbers and firepower until they break. This nightmare approach systematically obliterated the live and let leave systems that had spontaneously evolved among the soldiers. It shifted the focus away from individual interactions and mutual restraint towards large-scale, impersonal destruction. The potential for spontaneous cooperation was crushed by the machinery of total war. This brings me to a recurring fantasy I have when thinking about the W1 truces. Imagine, if you will, 2 extra inventions existed back then. Modern mass communications, texting, Twitter, Facebook, and a mindset of cynical disillusionment that only fully emerged among the war's survivors. Men up and down hundreds of miles of trenches repeatedly reinvented live and let live, unaware they weren't alone. Now imagine texts bouncing along the lines, a million soldiers at death's door saying, "This is bullshit. None of us here want to fight anymore. We've figured out a way to stop." Could they have ended it? Tossed down their guns, ignored or ridiculed the objecting officers, gone home? Perhaps. It makes you think about how communication and shared awareness might amplify these tendencies for cooperation, even in the darkest circumstances. Of course, it's easy to romanticize the past. Our contemporary adversaries commit horrific acts, display evidence online, kidnap girls, sell them into slavery. Reading the news, I feel passionate hatred. It's impossible to imagine kicking back, singing carols, and exchanging trinkets with Al-Qaeda grunts. Yet time does interesting things. Consider the hatred between Americans and Japanese during World War II boundless. Hunting licenses advertised Jap hunting. Skulls boiled for table ornaments. Bones carved into letter openers. If Richard Fisk had been a POW, Zenji Abe might have helped march him to death. Instead, over 50 years later, one wrote a letter of condolence to the other's grandchildren upon Grandpa's death. It suggests that intense hatred fueled by ignorance and propaganda can fade. Future generations might look back at our current passions and find them baffling, much like we look back at the pseudo-speciation of the past. Philosopher George Santayana gave us that famous quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it," usually interpreted as a warning about repeating mistakes. But let's turn Santayana on his head. Those who do not remember the extraordinary truces of the Dalbuan trenches, who do not learn of reconciliations like Abe and Fiska, Mandela and Viljoen, Hussein and Rabin, who do not recognize that science can teach us how to make such events more likely, those who forget these reasons to hope are condemned to be less likely to repeat them. Remembering these moments of connection, of overcoming division, is vital if we want to cultivate more of them. Okay, let's quickly recap some key themes from the book before diving into the neuroscience appendix. The single most important point: virtually every scientific fact presented concerns the average. There's always variation, and it's often the most interesting part. Not every person activates their amygdala the same way when seeing an outgroup face. Not every yeast cell sticks to another with the same marker. Instead, on average, they do. The text itself is littered with words like average, typically, usually, often, tend to, generally. More than 500 times, I think. Science is full of individual differences and fascinating exceptions. Other key points: willpower is great, but making the better choice automatic is usually more effective. Distraction and reappraisal often help more than sheer grit. Brain plasticity? Cool, but no surprise it has to work that way. Childhood adversity can scar us deeply, affecting DNA and culture, with effects lasting lifetimes, even across generations. But the good news is, more adverse consequences can be reversed than we used to think. Though the longer you wait to intervene, the harder it gets. Brains and cultures evolve together, influencing each other constantly. Things that seem morally obvious now weren't always so. Many started with non-conforming thinkers. Biology often doesn't cause behavior directly, but modulates it, lowering thresholds for environmental triggers. Think hormones influencing aggression or fear. Cognition and emotion always interact. It's interesting when one dominates. Genes have different effects in different environments. Context. We haven't evolved to be selfish or altruistic. We've evolved to be particular ways in particular settings. Intense love and hate aren't opposites biologically. Indifference is. Adolescence shows our brains are designed to be shaped heavily by experience, maximizing learning through context. Remember, arbitrary boundaries are useful, but never forget they're arbitrary. We often chase pleasure, but the pursuit and anticipation might be more important than the experience itself. You can't understand aggression without understanding fear, and the amygdala's role in both. Genes aren't about inevitability, they're about potential and vulnerability, interacting constantly with the environment. Evolution favors tweaking gene regulation over changing genes themselves. We implicitly divide the world into us and them, preferring us, and we're easily manipulated about who counts as which. We're not purely chimp-like or bonobo-like. We're somewhere in between, making us resilient but socially messy. Hunter-gatherer life wasn't ceaselessly bloody. Complex societies and anonymity brought new challenges. A system working well is value-neutral. It takes discipline to achieve either good or appalling results. Our best moral moments have roots far deeper than civilization. Be wary of metaphors comparing others to infectious things. Socioeconomic status is a uniquely human tool for subordination. Being prosocial within your group is easier than being prosocial between groups. The road to hell is paved with rationalization. Our current certainty might seem ghastly to future selves. Feeling empathy doesn't guarantee action. People die for sacred values, respecting theirs is key to peace. We're constantly shaped by unseen forces. Our worst behaviors are products of biology, but so are our best. Ordinary individuals show our finest moments. So, wrapping up the themes, human nature is complex, neither purely aggressive nor peaceful, but somewhere in between, making us adaptable but socially complicated. Life before complex societies was probably less bloody than we imagine. Modern systems allow anonymity and distance, creating new ethical challenges. Well-functioning systems can be used for good or ill. Our morality has deep evolutionary roots. Be skeptical of dehumanizing language. Socioeconomic status is a uniquely human tool for hierarchy. Helping our own group is easier than helping outsiders. Justifying harmful actions is easy, but opposing them while citing exceptions leads to misery. Our current beliefs might seem extreme later. Empathy and reasoning don't automatically translate to action. Sacred values drive immense sacrifice, understanding them is key. We're shaped by countless unseen factors. Our capacity for evil and good stems from the same biology. And finally, ordinary people can embody our species' greatest potential. Two final thoughts. If you had to boil this all down to one phrase, it would be it's complicated. Nothing seems to cause anything directly. Everything just modulates something else. Science is full of revisions. We used to think X, but now we realize. Fixing one problem often creates 10 more. On any big issue, studies seem to contradict each other. It can feel hopeless trying to make things better. But we have no choice but to try. And if you're reading this, you're probably ideally suited to do so. You've shown intellectual tenacity. You likely have advantages: running water, a home, education, safety. You're one of the lucky humans. So try. Finally, don't choose between being scientific and compassionate. They can inform and enhance each other. Alright, let's switch gears slightly into the neuroscience appendix. Think about the speed required for survival. Puberty, hitting 24 hours late. Not a huge deal. Delaying antibody production, rarely fatal. But delay a lion chase response, dead meat. The nervous system operates on an incredibly short timescale. Speed is paramount. It's all about contrasts, maximizing signal-to-noise ratios. This is demanding and expensive. The basic building block is the neuron, the cell we typically call a brain cell. There are about 100 billion of them in our heads, communicating via complex circuits. There are also glia cells, the support staff, providing structure, insulation, energy, cleanup. Crucially, there are about 10 glial cells for every neuron. They hugely influence neuronal communication and even form their own networks. But for simplicity, let's focus on neurons. What makes neurons distinctive? Unlike simple red blood cells, they are highly asymmetrical, elongated beasts with processes sticking out everywhere. Look at the structure. At one end are the dendrites, the metaphorical ears, receiving information from previous neurons. At the other end is the axon, the mouth, transmitting the signal to the next neuron. Axon terminals connect to the dendrites of the following neuron. Information flows from dendrites to the cell body, then down the axon to the axon terminals, passing the signal on. This diagram shows the key parts: dendrite, cell body, axon, and axon terminals. What actually travels? A wave of electrical excitation. Inside the neuron, various ions are present. Outside too. When a signal arrives at a dendrite, channels open, allowing ions to flow, making the inside temporarily more positive. This spreads. But here's a crucial detail: the resting state isn't neutral. The inside is actively kept negatively charged relative to the outside. This requires constant work by pumps. When excited, the pumps stop, channels open, ions rush, making the inside positive briefly. Then the pumps kick back in to restore the negative resting potential. Generating this dramatic contrast costs energy. Nearly half the neuron's energy budget goes to maintaining the resting potential. Now that simple picture isn't quite right. A single excitatory signal at one dendritic branch only slightly depolarizes that local area, from -70 to maybe -60 millivolts. It's like tossing a pebble in a calm lake, a ripple that dissipates quickly. To generate a full action potential, the signal needs to reach the axon hillock, the base of the axon. If enough inputs arrive simultaneously, either repeatedly at the same spine or from multiple spines at once, the threshold around -40 millivolts is reached. Once threshold is crossed, a massive ion migration occurs. generating the full positive charge of the action potential, which then propagates down the axon. So, from the dendrites to the axon hillock, it's an analog signal, graded and fading. From the hillock onwards, it's digital, all or nothing. Consider the scale. An average neuron has about 10,000 dendritic spines and 10,000 axon terminals. What does this mean? One neuron can project to many targets divergence, but its influence per target diminishes. Conversely, a neuron receives inputs from many sources convergence. Whether it fires depends on integrating all these inputs. This massive connectivity, with signals diverging and converging, is what allows the brain to process information so complexly. It's not just kidneys, it's poetry. So the action potential reaches the axon terminals. How does it communicate with the next neuron? For a long time, scientists debated whether neurons were separate entities, the neuron doctrine, or fused into a continuous network, the syncytium theory. The syncytium folks demanded proof of gaps. Then in 1873, Camillo Golgi invented a staining technique. Santiago Ramon y Cajal used it, revealing individual neurons, discrete units separated by tiny gaps. Case closed for the syncytiumites. But this created a new puzzle. How does the electrical signal leap across this synapse? The answer, discovered over decades, is that the electrical signal doesn't leap. It gets translated into a chemical signal. At the axon terminal, vesicles filled with neurotransmitter molecules fuse with the membrane when the action potential arrives, releasing the neurotransmitter into the synapse. It diffuses across the gap and binds to receptors on the postsynaptic neuron's dendrite. This binding opens ion channels, initiating a new electrical signal. Crucially, the neurotransmitter must be cleared quickly. This happens via reuptake pumps recycling it or enzymes breaking it down. This clearance mechanism is key. Want to increase signaling strength? You could release more neurotransmitter, the presynaptic neuron yells louder. Or increase receptor density on the postsynaptic side, listen better. Alternatively, decrease reuptake pump activity, letting neurotransmitter linger longer, or decrease the degradative enzymes activity. Many fascinating findings explaining individual differences in behavior relate precisely to variations in these systems: amounts made, released, receptor function, enzyme activity. That's a whirlwind tour.